Beamy Blake 32. Run a freelance video production business. Been doing it since my mid-20s. Weddings, corporate videos, some commercial work when it comes in. Started with one used camera body and a secondhand laptop I found through a classified ad. First couple of years were genuinely rough. Some months barely covering rent, eating through savings. By the time I was 28, I'd built up a steady enough client base to feel like it was actually working. It's not the kind of job that impresses people at dinner parties. Shoot weddings for a living. Most people nod politely and change the subject. But I built every part of it myself, and every client I've found me through my own work. That matters to me in a way I don't need to explain. Met Jess at a mutual friend's birthday gathering, one of those low-key apartment parties where 15 people sit on rented chairs and pretend it's a dinner. She was on the other side of the room talking to someone and laughing. Not performing a laugh, not doing the thing people do when they want to look like they're having a good time, just genuinely laughing at something. I noticed her and eventually made my way over, and we ended up talking for a few hours. I missed most of the party just standing in that corner. Exchanged numbers before I left. Started seeing each other within a couple of weeks. Those first few months were good. She was warm, easy to be around, had real opinions about things, and actually listened when you talked back. She asked questions that weren't just social filler. I genuinely liked her. We'd make plans same day sometimes, just decide to go somewhere without a lot of build-up. I took her to a shoot once, a small commercial job, let her watch how it all worked. She asked a lot of questions, was genuinely curious about the technical side. I remember liking that she wasn't just politely interested, she actually wanted to understand it. She came to a few more after that, when I had jobs she could tag along on. We drove a lot at night, just talking. No destination, particularly. That was a good period. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't. Her mom, Sheila, came up in conversation pretty early. Within the first few weeks, I noticed Jess would reference Sheila's opinion on things pretty regularly. Small things, big things. What to do about a situation at work. How to feel about something that happened. Sheila's view got mentioned a lot. I figured it was just a close family thing. Some people are like that with a parent. Seemed normal. Met Sheila about 6 or 7 weeks into dating. Dinner at their place. It was a nice house. Well-maintained. Everything in a considered place. The kind of home that's been organized by someone who cares how it presents. Sheila was welcoming. Offered food immediately. Made conversation easily. But there was something underneath it. A particular quality to the way she looked at me. Not hostile, more like someone running an assessment, taking measurements. She asked about my work, what freelance actually paid, whether video production had long-term stability. I answered everything honestly, told her the income varied by season, that wedding season carried a lot of the year, that I had some corporate clients who evened things out. When I mentioned the seasonal inconsistency, she glanced at Jess. Brief? Probably not conscious, but I caught it. Her expression didn't shift afterward. She just moved the conversation somewhere else. By the end of the evening, she told me I seemed interesting and that she hoped things would work out for us. Interesting. Not warm, not impressive, just interesting. Jess texted me later that night to say her mom had liked me. I believed her. In hindsight, interesting was doing a lot of work in that sentence. But I was 28 and in the early months of something that felt real, not in the habit of reading between lines. Things progressed the way they do. We got more serious over the following months, moved in together after about a year of dating. The apartment was mine. I'd been there a few years and had my whole editing set up in the second bedroom. She moved her things over a couple of weekends, a few boxes at a time. We sorted the space out together, who gets which side of the closet, how the kitchen gets organized, whether the sofa goes left or right of the window. Normal couple friction, nothing serious. We worked through it. First year of actually sharing a space was mostly fine. We had disagreements, Every couple does, but nothing that set off any kind of alarm for me. I thought we were doing the normal work of figuring out how to build a shared life. Somewhere during that period, I decided I wanted to marry her. I planned it out properly, bought a ring, thought it through carefully. I was genuinely happy about the decision, not anxious about it, just ready. She said yes, cried a little. I remember thinking, this is exactly what I want. We got married about a year later. Small ceremony, just the people who actually mattered to both of us. Sheila was there, cried emotional, happy tears throughout the whole thing, hugged me at the reception, and said she was so glad Jess had found someone like me. I thought, okay, the mom situation is going to be fine. Came back from the honeymoon and settled into being married. For a while, it honestly just felt like the same thing, but more official. The first stretch was okay. Not perfect, nothing is, but okay. We took a long weekend trip early in that first married year, drove somewhere neither of us had been before. She was good company on the road, easy to travel with, didn't turn the small inconveniences into anything. I have a specific memory from that trip, eating at a roadside place somewhere in the middle of the drive. Cheap food, plastic chairs outside, bad coffee in paper cups. She was laughing about something. I can't even remember what now, just something stupid that happened. And I thought, yeah, this is exactly right. This is the person. I'm not telling that to make the rest of it sadder than it needs to be. That period was real, and I'm not going to pretend it wasn't. Then something started shifting. I can't give it an exact start date because it wasn't sudden. It was gradual, the way a season changes. You don't notice the temperature dropping until you're already cold. Jess started keeping track of things I hadn't known were on any list. I'd come home late from a shoot, sometimes past midnight after a long wedding day, and she'd be awake with a particular quality of silence about her. That specific kind of quiet that isn't peaceful, but isn't yet a conversation. I'd ask what was wrong. She'd say nothing in that tone that means the opposite of nothing. I'd push a little, and she'd say that I never acknowledged how difficult it was for her when I was gone all evening. I'd apologize, say I understood my hours were hard on her, that I was sorry. That would hold for a day or two. Then the same dynamic would come back through a different door. I forgot to say something specific about a meal she'd made, and she brought it up 2 days later as evidence I didn't appreciate her effort. I apologized. I didn't respond to a text for a couple of hours while I was in the middle of a shoot, and she was visibly upset when I got home. I apologized for that, too. I started noticing that apologizing didn't actually close anything out. It bought a short stretch of relative calm, and then there'd be a new thing just as significant as the last. I tried once to bring something up from my end. A time she'd been dismissive about something I was stressed about, a client that had fallen through last minute. She said she didn't remember it the way I did. I tried to explain what I remembered. Somewhere in the middle of that conversation, I lost the thread of why I'd brought it up, and by the end of it, I was apologizing for having raised it. I'm not exaggerating that. I started getting careful about what I said and how I said things. That carefulness wasn't comfort. It was constant navigation. You adjust to it so gradually that you don't notice you've adjusted. I remember once making a plan with a friend, just a coffee thing on a Saturday afternoon. Mentioned it to Jess the night before, and she went quiet in that way. Said she'd been looking forward to having that Saturday together. I hadn't known that. It hadn't been discussed. There was nothing on the calendar. I canceled with my friend. It happened again a few weeks later, slightly different version of the same thing. I'd made a work commitment for an evening, and she said I always prioritize clients over her. The client was someone I'd been working with for 2 years, and they needed something turned around quickly. I tried to explain the situation, and it came out as defending myself, which became its own problem. Apologized for that, too. I stopped making plans without checking first. Then she said I always had to ask permission like a child, which showed I didn't have initiative. I couldn't find the right setting for any of it. Around this same period, Sheila started showing up more, not just for occasional planned family dinners, but regular weekend visits, sometimes a midweek one, if she and Jess had something to do together. I'd come home from a shoot and find her in the kitchen with Jess, both mid-conversation. They'd look up when I came in. I'd say hi, make a bit of conversation, and eventually go to the editing room to work. Once I came home to find them both on the sofa, looking at something on Sheila's laptop together. I asked if everything was okay. Jess said yes, they were just reading something. I asked what. Jess said it was an article Sheila had found, something about emotional labor in relationships. I said interesting and went to make food. I could hear them talking quietly from the other room. I didn't ask again. Sheila had opinions about relationships that started showing up in dinner conversation more often. She'd talk about how men weren't naturally equipped for emotional labor and needed to be taught it. How accountability in a marriage meant a man consistently naming and owning the way his behavior affected his partner. I'd nod and keep eating. There was one dinner where she talked for almost 20 minutes about power dynamics in domestic partnerships. I remember just watching my plate. Jess was nodding along with something specific in her eyes, like someone finally hearing something confirmed. After a while, Jess started using phrases I recognized as Sheila's. She'd say I wasn't taking accountability. She'd say she needed me to acknowledge the impact I had on her emotional state. These weren't phrases she used before we got married. I noticed the shift, but didn't say anything about it directly. I mentioned it once, gently, said her language had changed a bit. She said she'd been doing some reading and thinking, that she was just trying to communicate better. I let it go. I asked once what specifically she needed me to acknowledge. She said that if she had to explain it to me, then I was already missing the point. I asked multiple times, in different ways, on different occasions, what I could do differently. When I tried the things she described, it came out as performative. When I pushed back gently, it was defensive. When I just listened without responding immediately, it showed I wasn't truly engaged. There was no reading I could put it on that came out as right. I want to be clear here that I wasn't a perfect husband. I worked long hours through busy stretches, and sometimes let the work take over the whole weekend. I got absorbed in projects and missed check-ins. I wasn't always good at recognizing when she needed me to be present instead of trying to fix things. These were real shortcomings, I'm not pretending otherwise. But there's a difference between genuinely adjusting for someone you love and indefinitely auditioning for your own home. That gap had been widening for a long time. Sheila was over for dinner more regularly by this point. She and Jess would often be mid-conversation when I got back, and I'd sit down and join whatever was being discussed. She was sharp in a lot of ways, knew a lot about a lot of subjects. But every road she took in conversation eventually passed through the same territory. Men and accountability, men and emotional availability, the weight women carried in heterosexual partnerships. I kept my thoughts to myself mostly. One evening, she got more specific than usual. She said she believed couples needed structured, regular check-ins to function well over time, that a husband needed to set time aside each week to name and acknowledge his contribution to whatever friction had built up between them. Jess was listening with focused attention. Then Sheila said she had a specific proposal. She thought I should sit down with Jess every Sunday and formally apologize. Work through the week, reflect on it, and acknowledge the ways I might have fallen short or caused unnecessary stress. She called it emotional accountability practice. She said she'd been reading about it and thought it was something progressive couples were doing. I put my fork down. I looked at Sheila and asked if she was being serious. Completely, she said, without a pause. I turned to Jess. She was nodding slowly beside her mother, like she'd been waiting for someone to say this out loud for a long time. She said quietly that she thought it could make a real difference, that she needed to feel like I was actually committed to the relationship. I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, "Give me a week to think about it." Sheila looked satisfied in that particular self-contained way she had, like a person already confident of the outcome. Jess smiled, more relaxed than I'd seen her in weeks. On the drive home, I kept thinking about that smile. It wasn't a smile at me. It was a smile at the situation, at getting something she'd been waiting for. There's a real difference between those two things. I lay awake that night and just thought quietly. No spiraling, no dramatic internal argument, just working through it. I thought about the Sunday apology arrangement as a concept. Every week, formally, go through what I'd done wrong. I tried to imagine sitting down and doing that. Tried to imagine what Sheila would look like across the room watching. Tried to imagine Jess's face as she received it. None of the images felt like a marriage. They felt like something else entirely. I tried to remember the last time Jess had actually apologized to me for something real. Not the reflex sorry when she walked in front of me, not a social nicety. An actual sit-down acknowledgement that she'd handled something badly and she knew it. I went back through the previous year as carefully as I could. I couldn't find one, not a single one. I didn't build a theory around that, or turn it into something bigger than it was. I just noted it, and eventually fell asleep. A few days later, I called a friend, someone I'd known since well before Jess was in the picture. We met for coffee at a place near his office. I gave him the whole thing over about 40 minutes, as plainly as I could manage. The Sunday apology proposal, the 3 years of apologizing for things I wasn't sure I'd done, Sheila's growing presence. All of it, in order, without editorializing. He sat with his coffee and didn't shift in his seat or look impatient. He listened without interrupting, which is something I've always appreciated about him. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, looked at his cup. Then he asked, "When was the last time she actually apologized to you for anything real?" Same question I'd been sitting with. I said I couldn't come up with one. He nodded once and didn't say anything else. We sat there for a bit. He ordered another coffee, and we talked about other things for a while before I left. That was the whole conversation. Sometimes one question is all you need from another person. Drove home, opened my laptop that evening, and started reading. Legal stuff. General information about what divorce looks like practically for someone in my situation. I wasn't in crisis mode doing this. I just wanted to understand the landscape. What I found was that freelance business assets documented clearly under sole trader registration are typically treated separately from marital assets. My camera equipment, business account, software licenses, all of it had been registered under the business going back years before Jess and I met. The apartment situation was more layered because of the joint mortgage, but it had established legal processes. I made notes. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Found him through a recommendation from someone I'd done a corporate shoot for a while back. Made an appointment for that week. Went in on a Friday afternoon. He was efficient, asked the right questions, didn't add unnecessary weight to any of it. He walked me through what I'd need. Business registration history, documented purchase records for equipment, financial account history establishing the timeline. He said doing this carefully and methodically would make everything cleaner for both sides. I asked about realistic timeline, and he gave me a range. I said I wanted to move forward properly. He said that was the right approach. We booked a follow-up. That evening, I went home and had dinner with Jess. She was in a decent mood, told me something that had happened at work, laughed about it. I laughed in the right places. Everything on the surface was completely as it always was, because, from her perspective, it was. Over the next few weeks, I gathered what I needed. Business registration documents going back before we met, equipment purchase records, account histories. I spent one afternoon going through an old filing box I kept in the closet, sorting receipts and contracts. Most of it was well organized already. I'd always kept good records for tax purposes. Everything I needed was there, just needed pulling together. Nothing secretive about any of it, just organizing what had always existed. I also started keeping better notes on things in the present, time-stamped, factual, just being thorough. I was calm during all of this. I want to be clear about that because I think people expect there to be some big emotional thing. There wasn't. I'd made a decision and I was implementing it. I slept fine at night. Jess asked once during this period if I'd thought more about the Sunday arrangement. I said I'd been thinking about it and would let her know soon. She seemed satisfied with that, didn't push. Sheila called one afternoon during this stretch, said she was checking in on how things were going. I said fine and handed the phone to Jess. Work kept me busy in this stretch, consecutive weekend bookings, a corporate client with a tight deadline. I was tired, but it was the good kind of tired that comes from doing something you're actually skilled at. One of these weddings, something happened that I kept coming back to afterward. I was moving through the reception, doing the ambient coverage, watching for the unscripted moments. Late in the evening, the groom was dancing with his wife. I've shot this moment many times at this point, too many to count. Most grooms at that stage in the night are either showing off for the room or just physically exhausted and going through the motions. This one wasn't doing either of those things. He had his forehead resting lightly against hers, and his whole body was completely settled. Not performing, not enduring, just at absolute ease with exactly where he was. I've been doing this job long enough to know the difference between a couple that's happy on their wedding day and a couple that's actually good together. Those two things are not the same thing. These two were actually good together. I got the shot. I kept watching them for a second after, through the viewfinder, before moving on. The image stayed with me on the drive home, in a way footage usually doesn't. I tried to remember feeling that specific thing around Jess. That particular quality, where someone's presence just quiets everything down around it. Not being in love in the way movies describe it. Just that specific ease, that sense that being in a room with this person means you can breathe properly. Maybe in the first year, probably. Not in recent memory. I pulled into the parking lot and sat in the car a few minutes before going up. Not dramatically, just sitting. Thinking about the groom's face. Thinking about how long it had been since I'd felt relaxed in my own home. Went upstairs, put my gear away, made tea. Jess was already asleep. I sat at the kitchen table with the tea and made a decision. Not with a lot of let-up or ceremony, just decided. Went to bed. The next morning, I called the lawyer before I'd eaten anything. Asked if he had time in the coming days to move forward. He did. I went in, brought the remaining documentation he needed. He said he could file by the end of the week. I said, go ahead. Paid the retainer, shook his hand, left. That evening was completely ordinary. Jess made dinner, we ate. She watched something on TV while I worked for a while. She told me a story about a coworker and found it funny. I laughed at the funny parts. The papers were filed within the week. No one knew. Sheila called on a Thursday. She was making sure Sunday was still happening, said she was looking forward to it. I told her Sunday was fine and I'd be there. I noticed genuine anticipation in her voice. That was interesting to observe. Saturday, I packed a bag. Methodically, no rush, just packing. Clothes for a couple of weeks, toiletries, hard drives with all my current project files, the camera equipment. I'd been thinking about what to take for a few days, so it didn't take long. I looked around the bedroom before I zipped the bag. The room was the same room it had always been. Same furniture, same light. Something about it was already different, though, already less mine. Loaded everything into the car that evening while Jess was on a call with a friend in the other room. The apartment looked exactly the same when I went back in. Sunday morning, Jess woke up in a good mood. lighter than she'd been in months, noticeably different energy. She made coffee and brought me a cup without being asked what I wanted for breakfast. I said whatever was easy, and she made eggs. We sat at the table, and she talked about wanting to repaint the living room, had colors she was considering. She showed me some pictures on her phone of rooms she liked. I said the blue one was good. She agreed and said she was going to look into paint samples. We talked about it for a bit, normal Sunday morning conversation. I offered opinions. She was relaxed, laughing at small things. It was actually a nice morning, and I let it be a nice morning. I wasn't cold to her or distant. I was just there having breakfast. Around midday, I heard a car pull up outside. Sheila, arriving early, which wasn't unusual. She had flowers with her. Actual flowers, like she was coming to a celebration. She kissed Jess on the cheek, put the flowers in a vase in the kitchen, and they both settled onto the sofa together. Sheila had her hands folded neatly in her lap. A composed woman who was radiating the specific energy of someone who knows they're about to get what they came for. Jess sat beside her, upright, similar composure. I came in from the kitchen and sat in the chair across from them. The folder was on the coffee table in front of me. I'd taken it from my car that morning. Sheila started talking, said how glad she was that we were doing this, what an important step it was for the relationship. She said she was proud of both of us for taking it seriously. I let her finish completely. When she was done, I said, "You're right." I said that I'd thought about it seriously, and that I agreed completely that what we'd been doing wasn't working and that something needed to change. Sheila nodded. That contained satisfied nod. I slid the folder across the coffee table toward Jess. She looked at it for a moment, then picked it up and opened it. She read the top of the first page, then kept reading. The room went very quiet. Sheila was watching Jess's face. I was watching it too. Sheila asked what it was. Jess didn't answer right away. She turned to the second page, kept reading. She set the folder down carefully onto her lap finally, still looking at the page. Then she said very quietly that they were divorce papers. Sheila didn't move for a moment. Then she stood up fast enough that her purse slid off the arm of the sofa. She said I couldn't possibly be serious. I said I was completely serious and that everything had already been filed. She started going quickly, that I was throwing everything away, that Jess had worked so hard on this marriage, that I was walking away over a simple communication issue when they'd only asked for one small thing. I sat and let her go through it. When she ran out of immediate momentum, I said, "I've been accountable to this marriage for 3 years. I said the documentation existed, my lawyer had all of it, and the process was already in motion." Sheila looked at me and said this was textbook avoidance, that I was displaying exactly the kind of toxic male behavior she'd warned Jess about from the beginning. She said men like me couldn't face themselves, so we destroyed things instead. Jess still hadn't said anything. She was still looking at the folder in her lap. I turned to her and said I was sorry it had reached this point. I told her I'd meant it when we got married, that I'd gone into it with real intentions. But somewhere in the last couple of years, I'd stopped recognizing what we were. She looked up finally. Her voice came out quiet when she asked why I hadn't told her any of this. I said I'd spent a long time saying things that didn't seem to be landing. Her eyes got wet. Sheila jumped back in immediately, said I was reframing years of her daughter's emotional work as my own suffering, that I was doing what men do, which was to make themselves the victim to avoid taking responsibility. She said her daughter had given everything to this marriage, and I was throwing it away because I couldn't face my own patterns. I stood up. I said everything else was in the folder, and my lawyer's contact information was at the back. I picked up my keys from the side table, walked to the hall, picked up my jacket from the hook, opened the front door. Sheila said something else as I stepped outside, but I was already past it. Got in the car, pulled out of the drive and drove. Went to my friend's place. He'd known something had been building. I'd mentioned vaguely that things were in motion. He wasn't caught off guard when I showed up with a bag. He made food, put a plate in front of me, sat across the table. He didn't fill the silence with anything useful or useless. He just sat there and ate with me. We ate. Eventually watched something on TV, some show neither of us had seen before. Neither of us tracked the plot. I slept on his sofa. That was fine. I lay there in the dark for a while before sleeping, not replaying the afternoon, just letting it sit. I didn't feel like I'd done something terrible. I felt like I'd done the thing I should have done earlier. Went to sleep. Texts from Jess started the next morning. Variations on disbelief and hurt, and questions about how long I'd been feeling this way without saying anything. Several across the day. One of them later said she'd spoken to her therapist, and that her therapist had confirmed this was a pattern of male emotional withdrawal and toxic avoidance used by men who couldn't face accountability. I read that one carefully. Put the phone down. Sheila had put something online. She didn't use my name, but she'd written about her daughter's husband walking away when asked to take basic responsibility in a marriage. She used the word coward and phrases about emotional manipulation and men who were allergic to accountability. She described the situation as a husband who had been gently guided toward basic decency and had responded by running. It was a thorough piece of work. I found out about it through a wedding planner I'd worked with several times over the years. She reached out to check on me after she saw it. I gave her the short version. She said she was sorry and that she'd worked alongside enough couples in her career to know when a story wasn't quite adding up the way it was being presented. She said Sheila's post hadn't fully added up to her. She'd keep recommending my work, as she always had, she said. That meant more than it might seem from the outside. One other person from the client's side reached out too, someone I'd done a corporate job for. He just said he'd seen something and wanted to say he hoped I was all right. I said I was, and thanked him. Both of those were short conversations, but they stuck with me. I let my lawyer know about the post. He said to document it and leave it for now, that public statements could become relevant if things escalated. I documented it and moved on. The legal process did its thing over the following months, civil in the practical sense. Jess had proper representation, and her lawyer was professional and reasonable to work with. The business assets went through their assessment, and the documentation I'd put together made the outcome straightforward. The apartment took longer because of the joint mortgage structure, but it had its process, and we followed it. Sheila tried to introduce some kind of emotional harm argument early on through Jess's lawyer. Her lawyer apparently had to explain to her that wasn't how asset division worked in practice. After that, the process mostly moved without significant drama. There were some tense exchanges through the lawyers over a couple of specific items. Nothing that became a real confrontation, just the back and forth of two people trying to get a fair outcome. Jess's lawyer was professional, and I respected that. We weren't enemies. We were just two people who'd made a mistake together and were unwinding it as cleanly as we could. I found a new apartment not far into the proceedings. Smaller, closer to where most of my client base was concentrated. Set up the editing room in the bedroom, kept the gear organized in the front room. I bought a new desk for the editing setup, first piece of furniture I'd bought entirely for myself in years. It sounds small, but it wasn't. From the first night in the new place, the apartment felt like mine, in a way the previous one had stopped feeling for a long time. I cooked my own food at whatever hour I wanted, left things where I left them, worked late without it meaning anything. I kept working through all of it. Had a full calendar, the corporate client renewed their contract, some new wedding referrals came in through the planner. The work kept me in motion, and that was good. Not avoidance, not hiding, just doing the thing I'd spent years building. I met my friend for coffee regularly during that stretch. He didn't make it heavy or fill it with retrospective wisdom. He was just around when I needed someone to be around. Good person to have in that kind of period. Sometime after the finalization, I ran into someone from the shared social circle. We got coffee, and she said she wanted me to know that from what she'd seen and heard, she thought I'd handled everything with real integrity. She said Jess had been telling her version of events to people, but that the details kept shifting slightly each time she told it. Some of the people who'd known both of us for a while had started noticing the inconsistencies. I said I appreciated her telling me that, but that I wasn't in the business of managing anyone else's perception of what had happened. I'd done what I'd done, and people could draw their own conclusions. She said that was fair. She also mentioned that Sheila was apparently still going, still talking, still posting occasionally, still describing the situation to anyone in the extended circle who would engage with it. I laughed a little at that, genuinely. There's something almost admirable about that level of commitment to a narrative. In a strange way, Sheila had done me a favor without meaning to. That dinner, where she'd laid out the Sunday apology arrangement, had been the exact moment I'd stopped being uncertain about anything. Before that evening, I'd been drifting, not fully clear on what I was actually dealing with. I'd told myself things might shift, that maybe I was being too hard on the situation. After that dinner, I knew exactly what I was dealing with, and I knew exactly what I was going to do about it. The clarity was almost a relief. Some months after everything was finalized, I got a message from Jess. I wasn't expecting it. I was going through footage from a shoot earlier that day when it came through. She said she'd been thinking about a lot of things. She'd been in consistent therapy and had started to understand some of the patterns that had developed in our relationship. She wrote that she could see now how some of what had happened between us had built up the way it did. She said she knew she hadn't been fair to me, and she was sorry for her part in how things had gone. It was a thoughtful message, more self-aware than anything she'd said during the marriage. I read it twice. I believed her when she wrote it. People can change. I don't have any interest in holding the opposite position. It just happened too late to matter for us. I waited until the next morning before I responded. Kept it short. Said I appreciated her saying it, that I hoped she was getting what she needed from the work she was doing, that I genuinely wished her well. She replied with just thanks. That was all. No continued back and forth, no reopening anything. Just a quiet close. I was actually out of town when all that happened. A documentary director I'd connected with through a corporate job had brought me on as camera operator for a short project. We were in a different city for a few days. The subject matter was genuinely interesting, different from the weddings and quarterly corporate videos I'd been doing. I was enjoying the work. Longer form, different pacing. You sit with a subject differently in documentary than you do in event work. At the end of one of the filming days, I was setting up a wide shot, trying to get the late light at the right angle before it went. Phone buzzed on the equipment case next to me. Jess's message. I read it, sat with it for a moment. Thought about the roadside place on that road trip, cheap food and bad coffee. Thought about the dinner where Sheila had put the flowers on the table like she was coming to celebrate. Thought about the groom at the wedding with his forehead resting against his wife's. Then I put the phone face down on the case, turned back to the frame, adjusted the angle slightly, checked the focus, pressed record. The light was doing something good, and I didn't want to miss it. That's the whole thing, from the beginning to now. From the party where I met her to that message she sent nearly 4 years later. I don't have a clean summary of lessons or a list of things men should do differently. I'm not interested in being anyone's cautionary tale or their success story. What I have is a clearer sense of what I'm willing to accept than I had before. I know the difference between adjusting for someone and disappearing for someone. I know what it felt like to come home to a place that was mine again. The work is good. The equipment is mine. The apartment is mine. The calendar is full. I sleep fine. That's where things stand right now.